Hello, welcome to the Crackpot Podcast.
A beautiful day to start up a revolution. Molotov cocktails, martini shotgun shells, wild, 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 wild one. God forbid the cops get called. I say the more the merrier inside this free. Gotta see it fall. I got front row tickets to the greatest show of all.
Welcome to the Crackpot Podcast. Today we're breaking our usual rule. Our rule is no celebrities, but today we have Adam Smith of the Myth of the 20th Century joining our little podcast.
I don't think celebrities count, but thank you for having me.
Hey, Adam.
Thanks for joining us. Sorry it took so long. I get kind of hung up on scheduling because James and I have weird schedules, but we also have daytime availability, so we have to make more effort to schedule people than we do to just chit chat. But we're glad you could join us. Let me go ahead and just say up front, I'm going to show it on the screen for enthusiasm, but look at this. So Adam wrote a book, and it's called Exit Strategy, and he was kind enough to allow me to prepare it for print publication, and I did that, and I'm really proud of being involved with it, Adam. It's a really cool book.
Yeah, a lot of people have been really impressed by the work you did, so I've actually never held that. If anybody doesn't understand that we've never met, so this is actually quite interesting for me.
We haven't met, but we've worked together, and I made this book for you. You made the book, and I made it into a print book, so
it's beautiful.
Thank you. So we can talk about that. James read it. James has a little bit of a foreword in there because he read it an early copy.
Yeah, it was really well done, James, and it's very nice of you to do that. Thank you.
Hey, I just read it in one sitting. I figured I'd read it a chapter a day and get back to you at the end of the week. And after 4 hours passed and Big Tony's garage there in Portland, I'd finished reading it. So I forget what I wrote, but it wasn't that much. I think it was 320 words. It was somewhere in that range.
It was perfect.
Yeah, that's really nice. So it's really a crackpot collaboration. So on the topic of exit strategy, I do have a question from John Paul Barber, and he is a friend of the podcast. He's been with us twice, and he is a listener of the Myth of the 20th Century as well.
Well, hey, John.
Our rule is if you've been in prison, we let you back on the show a second.
We have really high standards for who can be on the show. I'm going to read what he wrote I'm going to try to do a good job. Hey Adam, 23andMe recently updated their ancestry reports, and I just found out that I am 0.2% Somali. As part of my exit strategy, should I go ahead and move to Minnesota so I can better network with my people? Just kidding. What I'd really like to know is your opinion on what will be the most resilient regions of America to be living in as we slowly, or not so slowly, decline, society breaks down, and we're forced to accept a much lower standard of living. Also, how much of an advantage is it to live in an area like Appalachia, where we already have a head start on a lower standard of living compared to the rest of the country. I'm not really sure if that's true, but I mean, I'm here in
It's
California where I've been waiting for a power outage. But two questions there. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the question I think facing a lot of people right now. I was facing that question several years ago when I was still living in a big city, and I bought a book. I've talked about this many times. It's called Strategic Relocation by Joel Skousen. He's been on Alex Jones, but he also does this stuff, in lots of different venues as well. He's not tied to InfoWars by any means, but he's an independent author, and he's a former Marine Corps fighter pilot, and he's flown all over the world and speaks Spanish, and he's lived in South America. And he actually wrote this book cataloging actually all the different regions of not only the country but also the world in terms of security, from the standpoint that if you either expect, and his sort of background is the military, and so he forecasts the potential for nuclear war, and he also authored other books based on building fallout shelters and things like that. So keep that in mind when you're reading these rankings. But he ranks other countries, but I think for practical reasons, most of us are not going to leave. And so for the United States itself, most of the regions that he rates well are going to be in the Rocky Mountain regions, away from the coasts. Texas is sort of in the middle, but it's having so much Californication happening over the past 20 years that it's probably not going to change, unfortunately, if you just follow the trends. And so the mountain regions, I would say, in addition to the Rockies, you got the Ozarks, and you have, as John was asking about, the Appalachian areas, places like Tennessee, closer to the Appalachian Mountains, as well as parts of maybe even West Virginia, if you really are willing to go off grid. There is a lot of good places that you can actually set up your own self-sustaining farm. If you wanted to do that, it's more easy in places that are warmer, obviously. So the Ozarks and places in the South, you could even do something like that. But in terms of just a general geographic region that is somewhat removed from a lot of the potential for civil unrest and things like that, he in particular recommends the Rockies, as well as the other regions that I mentioned. But outside of there, unfortunately, there's just going to be a large number of problems if the cities go through. And Lynn, this is a perfect example. I mean, California, we've been talking about this in private, and you've been talking about it on Twitter. It is turned into what Latin America has been for God knows how many decades, where you have a very wealthy upper elite that has most of the wealth, most of the power, and then you have a very large underclass and a shrinking middle. And the middle class is very small in Latin America. But that's been what has been driving so much of the unrest, I think, in places like California, where white people have been leaving and being replaced by immigrants from Asia and Latin America. And then there is this small sort of very globalist elite that has remained in power. Your current governor, Gavin Newsom, recently, while the power company there was talking about shutting off the power grid for the entire half of the northern part of the state, he's blaming Donald Trump for yet another thing that has nothing to do with California. And so I made the decision that if I'm going to try to make my way in this world, I don't want to have to deal with people like this. And if you go to a place that is a little bit less populated, a little bit less important, to be honest, with regard to the economy and the globalist plans for basically carving up the nation state and doing it in places like California, where they have Silicon Valley and Los Angeles as sort of their globalist hubs for controlling the narrative, controlling the media, controlling basically just the information that we're exposed to. In places like New York and financial hubs in London, they're really not national centers anymore. They're international centers. And so if you're going to be located in a place like that, you really are low on the totem pole. And so if you go to a smaller area that has smaller numbers of people, and if you go to more remote regions, you can still find pockets that are like America, that were like everywhere, arguably back in the 1980s or sooner than that even. And so if you get out of the Eye of Sauron, or the Eye of Soros in our case, as the analogy goes, I think you've got a better bet. The hard thing, though, is making a living. And so it depends on what you do for a living. I've actually had to change what I do because of that. I used to be involved in technology, and some people can do it remotely, but the ability to do work in any location, that reduces the amount of job opportunities you may have. But there are some out there. I mean, construction is always something that is needed no matter where you go. If you have a ability like James to work in the food industry, obviously people need food. There's a lot of need for automotive, things like that. I think then you have to start thinking about how you're going to pay for it. But besides that, there are a lot of good regions out there, and I think I've talked at length about that topic, but I'll kick it back to you guys if you have any thoughts.
I love the Rocky Mountain area. It's my favorite place to be.
It's certainly beautiful. And one of the things about it is it reduces the density because of the ruggedness of the terrain. Like, there's no possibility for building a Los Angeles in the middle of the Rockies. Now, Salt Lake City has done its darndest to build something out, but there's limits to how far they can go. I mean, they're surrounded by mountains. And so if you find yourself in a smaller valley, the reality is, and I've talked to, and I know a little bit of construction myself, but I've also talked to civil engineers, and they won't even do a lot of jobs on the mountains because it's just not worth it. There's too much liability. It's too expensive. It's too difficult. And so realistically, you're going to have a lower population density. And so you have, again, that less intense economic structure that is going to basically overrule the little guy. And I think that's one of the advantages of being in the mountains.
There's a limit. There's a water limit too. For instance, that part of Utah above Salt Lake City, I've been up there 4 years in a row now. They're trying to make Portland at 8,000 feet above Salt Lake City. And supposedly the one city, Heber, is supposed to get 40,000 more people in the next 4 years. And Park City, every time I go through there, that's growing. But they're actually falsifying water records as far as what's available, what's in the ground, and who has the water rights in order to justify the building of some of the subdivisions. So they're probably going to hit their corruption limit soon. And it doesn't look like they're going to be able to get 500,000 people at 8,000 feet, although that seems to be the goal in these 5 little towns. A lot of the locals are being pushed out. They've already been pushed out of Park City, but the locals still work in the utilities and provide a lot of services. So even if they do that, still, it's just Portland. It's just 500,000 people. It's not part of some big megalopolis. A lot of the problems with places like Philadelphia, D.C., and Baltimore is it's basically just one elongated city that runs for 100 miles. So even if they do succeed in stretching the resources to the limit, it's still just going to be an outpost in the middle of the region.
Yeah, and James, you've lived in most of your life on the East Coast, and when you came out to the West, I think it was quite a shock to you how different the lifestyle is.
Yeah, it's the difference is just ridiculous. Now, I said I like the Rocky Mountains. The women are better looking. The men work hard. I'm regarded as a freak everywhere I go in the East because the amount of work that I'll do, and people are like, slow down. What are you doing? Let's just veg. And so when I'm out west, I can actually do projects with people, and I know we're going to work till it gets done. It's not going to be every 45 minutes somebody bugging me to take a 15-minute break. So that alone that's a huge difference.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that.
I think I've noticed a difference in your awareness of like European American lifestyle versus, because I think Baltimore is so mixed, even if individual people are not mixed, the culture is really, blended. You know what I'm trying to say?
Oh yeah. I understand. I blame it on the Irish.
I've noticed that. No, I mean, I've noticed it just in your cultural observations. Like, you didn't realize what life was like in other places, you know?
It's really weird getting used to people not locking the door to their house at night, no less.
Well, that's Utah. Okay,
Yeah,
that's not the West.
Yeah.
That's Mormons. Yeah, you go to Oakland or Los Angeles, you're not going to see that.
You have to be careful even in nice neighborhoods because the meth heads will just walk into your house. It's happened to people I know. People out in the woods in Bay Area, forests surrounding. There's the hills all around the Bay Area, and people live out there, and they'll have some drug-addled mountain person will just walk into your living room.
You just aired the show with Rick, who talked a little bit about being a grower, a marijuana grower.
Yeah.
He, in Nevada and in California, he was actually held as a slave growing dope for people.
By the cartel? Or?
And he had to run away. He said the Russians are moving in on the business. He lived up in Humboldt.
Yeah.
The name of the little town.
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually had to run away from the guy. He said that they killed people that worked as growers. There's a certain mountain that they would throw their bodies over, and nature would take care of it. And he was the last person left on this one place, and he lived in a tent. And he knew that the guy he worked for had killed people, that his friends had killed people, that the locals who actually used these people like him as their indentured servants, that they stuck together. So he did end up making his way out of there, and he actually sabotaged the guy's operation too, screwed him over as much as he could. But he had the same thing. Some black guy was holding him hostage in a house outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, and he got away from there too. He got away from that too.
Yeah, I don't know how like representative that experience is for people in that business. I actually happen to have met a couple of people who do that in Northern California, which was historically kind of where that happened for a lot of the pot growing for the consumption in California.
Jefferson's state of Jefferson is like state of pot.
It is, it isn't, but yeah, it's mainly the northern part. Like if you go into the foothills of the Sierras, there's a lot of Jefferson promotion and flags you'll see. But the amount of violence that I was not hearing from them was actually more encouraging than your friend's story. So I'm sorry you had to go through that. Now that it's been legalized, it's supposed to be safer, but I've also heard that they're actually not making as much money, and so that actually might be putting some pressure on some of these guys to cut corners.
They saw, and I also know people who do that, and they saw prices crash, and prices are better this season from what I'm hearing. But what they have is basically just an agricultural work structure where they want to pay labor as little as possible. And they need people to watch the plants. They need people to keep the plants safe because people will come and rob. And then at like harvest time, they need to have people picking and drying and bundling or whatever. So it's somewhat skilled labor, but pretty relatively unskilled, and they want to pay as little as possible. And that everybody who works there smokes pot and will just, happily steal from you. So
we had Mr. Gray was on the porch with Rick. Okay. And he spent a half hour telling us about his growing experiences. And Mr. Gray keeps looking at me. He's like, this sounds exactly what you wrote about in Plantation America, with the tobacco farming and everything.
Yeah.
What would happen is one guy would get money. He'd say, I'm fronting the money. I'm paying the rent on the house. I'm paying the utilities. You guys can't leave the house until this crop is harvested, and then I pay you out of the proceeds.
And you're not going to get paid until it's harvested and sold either. Like you can't.
So they control your food and everything.
Yeah, so you have to live there until it's all done.
He couldn't even leave to go to the store to get something to eat. The guy that he was working for that was housing him in both cases had to go and get everything because he wasn't allowed to leave the house, because it wasn't just growing, he's guarding the house too.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to think what a nightmare it is where everybody on the premises is kind of drug-addled and working in a high-risk environment where you're at risk mostly from other people in your own business, but also from law enforcement, because you're still not supposed to be growing commercially, in California. Like, growing commercially is really hard to do, even though it's recreation legal now. This is a strange topic for us, but why do we all know so much about it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't smoke.
I don't either.
I'm a boomer, so everybody I know is a pothead or a pill popper. Okay.
The pill thing is also shocking to me because I certainly know people who smoke marijuana, but I one of my ex-girlfriends, unfortunately, was taking a lot of SSRIs and things like that, and this has sort of become a meme where women are basically taking these antidepressants. But apparently, this is a common thing, and I've not personally known that many people though, but I hear a lot of people telling me that it's a common thing, which is shocking to me. I don't know, Lynn. I mean, if by some of that from your conversations with your girlfriends or anything like that, but
the numbers for middle-aged white women are staggering. It's like if you're over 40 white women, I think it's half of those women are on.
How is that even allowed? I mean, how do you have a society that basically endorses? I mean, we're basically saying that half of the population has some sort of mental disorder whereby they need pharmaceutical help. And somehow for the entire history of mankind before these were invented, none of that was there, and we all got here just fine.
Well, look at...
Like, that doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't. And if you look at tummy ache, what I call tummy ache drugs, like all these acid reflux drugs, it's the same because it's somehow accepted that everyone has a tummy ache all the time. And you have to have these drugs. You have to have suppress the natural acid of your stomach. We don't know what the long-term side effects of that are. And so you just see how systematically ill people are. It's really shocking.
I can tell you that every one of the middle-aged Caucasian women that I have dated or been involved with has been on antidepressants. I don't think it was because of me, because the two black chicks I dated weren't on antidepressants, but every one of the white girls were. There's like a dozen of them. I guess I was in a target-rich environment for depression, being in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. But yeah.
Well, I'm not, for the record. All natural.
Good for you.
All natural mood management with caffeine.
The old-fashioned way.
My drug of choice. But yeah, something is wrong. I mean, something is very, very wrong. And you've talked about it before, Adam, about sleep. I think it's in your book, too, about how people need help to sleep. So look at these basic things. Like, I need help to just not feel miserable. I need help because my tummy hurts all day long, no matter what. And I can't even go to sleep at night. Just basic things people can't do.
I can't really... I'm not a doctor. I'm basically just a guy who asks questions in a sea of people who don't. So I guess that's why people listen to our show, which is still astonishing to me that we actually got so popular that YouTube had to ban us. Hope that doesn't happen to your YouTube channel. Hush, hush, wink, wink. But the basic thing I'd say is just in summary, I think the United States is people even make fun of me for calling it a sick society because they'll say, well, we're not even living in a society. But it's an experiment. It's an experiment in which there's some new ideas that have been tried where nowhere else in the world where they've ever been tried. And you're trying to basically create a synthesis of a hodgepodge of people from all over the world on a relatively open continent that was developed at a very rapid pace. And in order to unify it into a coherent political body, the powers that be basically saw it, and the powers that be are multifaceted, but you could basically look to the most important ones, which are obviously the government, the people with money, the businesses, and then maybe the military. And people in the media, you probably put them as the fourth, or academic establishment is maybe the fifth, or you can rearrange those. But those are the power centers of almost any country. But in the United States, it's especially important because we don't have a shared history as a people. And there's a lot of myth making, and the title of our show is Myth of the 20th Century. And why we focus on the 20th century is because it really is the entry point for the United States, especially to the world stage, whereby it basically took over. The Second World War was especially critical in that, whereby all the European empires basically fell away, and the United States, through some intentional design, became the counterpoint to the Soviet Union, and those are the two major powers left after that horrible, never before seen conflict. And when the Soviet Union fell down, though, the United States was left unopposed. And so the system that was applied to the immigrant peoples that James has talked at length about in his many good books on this subject, that came into the United States on basic economic grounds. It really wasn't yes, there were religious people who came in the form of the Puritans and many other groups as well, but the majority of the people who came to the United States were coming for economic reasons, I would argue, and they wanted basically a stake at the opportunities to have their own life, to raise a family, that sort of thing. And so there was a lot of free land, and people came to do that. But in order to unify that, there was a lot of myths created about what America was, and it was the land of opportunity. It was the way to, be great, be special, be unique. You'll have freedom. So all these words were kind of woven into the fabric of what we're taught growing up, and it arguably was maybe more true in certain periods than other times. But if you compare it to today, where we have a very not so subtle anymore establishment that is using the powers of the media and the powers of ostracism, powers of even the financial system to actually crowd out enemies that are critical of it, you realize that this is actually a very powerful empire that has tried to meld a lot of various people into the continent that we're calling basically America. And then now, because it's expanded its scope across the planet, if you really look at how business is conducted, how people dress for work, what language is being used, it really is all American. We all consume American media as well globally. And so this system, through Hollywood projection, military projection, the biggest military the world has ever seen, the number of bases worldwide are probably in
over 900.
Yeah, I was going to say 1,000, but it's a global.
I saw was 913.
Yeah, but that doesn't even count all the black sites that are not even talked about, and so that number may include some of those, but it really is anybody's guess. But we know it's a lot, and so what does that do to the people who are living on the strip of land that is sort of in the center of it all? Well, they used to be, I think, more important to the empire because the empire didn't really have the scope that it had. But if you compare it to maybe what Rome started out as, where it was basically just a bunch of farmers in Italy who were tired of getting invaded, and then they basically created a militia that happened to be good at what they did. Eventually they unified the peninsula, and then they started waging war against the neighboring tribes to subdue them and then tax them. And then slowly but surely, the thing basically kept growing and growing larger to the point where they basically couldn't keep the center will not hold, as the phrase goes, but they couldn't keep a lid on the whole system. And so it basically ended up to the point where the people that were fighting for Rome, that would leave their farms, for example, from the peninsula, the Italian peninsula, they would go off on these campaigns for the empire and be promised, well, you're doing this to defend your homeland. You must do this for the glory of Rome. They win, and they come back and they find out that their lands have been stolen by the senators. And then they're told, well, if you actually want some land, you need to go fight in Dacia. We need to subdue those peoples. And if you do that, then you'll get some land over there. But this land is ours now. And that was in very blunt terms. They didn't really have a democracy, so they could sort of subjugate their people in a very direct way. In America, it works a little bit differently. Okay, so you've got a people like all of us who grew up here, who are told, America is the land of opportunity, it's the land of immigrants. You are an immigrant, so you owe these other immigrants the opportunities that your predecessors had. And so you need to let them come in and work for less than you, and you have to compete with them. And if you can't get ahead, then it's your fault. And you have to move to a place where you can make it. But if you can't, well, that's your fault, so good luck. But isn't it great that we're all Americans, and aren't we glorious because we have this global system now? It's very much like the Roman Empire in many ways. And so what does that do? It demoralizes people because they're constantly being subjected to competition that was not even seen in Rome. I mean, the number of people in the world back in AD 0 was probably no more than 100 million, something like that. We're talking about a planet full of 7 billion people that now can use a telecommunication system like we're using tonight to talk over thousands of miles instantly. You can travel, get on a plane, and travel to anywhere in the world in the matter of a day at most to move around the planet if you wanted to, and effectively. And what does that do? It exposes every single individual person on the planet, if you're part of this globalized system, which America is first and foremost representative of. It exposes each person to competition from 7 billion other people. And if you are not the top of your game, you're reduced to, it's not exactly slavery, but your status is reduced to almost nothing. And we all are inculcated in this culture of admiring these successful people. And I certainly was, and I still do. But I've come to the point where, and I think this is where it relates to why so many people are stressed out all the time. And I don't know if Lynn can speak to the perspective from the women, but I think it's a general thing that men are certainly frustrated economically because we have all this competition globally now. All the factories have been moved overseas because they're cheaper, they work harder, they have better quality in some cases. So what are you left with to do? I mean, I compare it oftentimes to what happened to the horses when the internal combustion engine was introduced. It's like the number of horses, I put this in the book, but I don't remember the exact number, but in 1910, thereabouts when the Model T was becoming big, the number of horses in the United States when the population was only about 120 million or so, the number of horses in the United States was like 20 million.
There was 100,000 horses in New York City alone in 1900.
How many were there?
100,000 in New York City alone in 1900. They had a 4-acre block that was nothing but a pile of horse shit. I forget exactly what neighborhood it's in.
Yeah, and New York is just a pinprick on the map. And so if you look at the entire country, which is agricultural in nature, and this was before the combine, before all the automated machinery that farms, these animals were doing very critical work. But when and they always say, well, if you get displaced economically, there's always another job out there. You can just retrain and skill yourself up. Well, I'm sorry, not everybody can be a programmer, not everybody can be a lawyer, not everybody can be a rocket scientist, which is even these days actually kind of an outdated phrase. I mean, nobody really does that anymore, to be honest. But it's the point is, what happened to the horses could happen to people, and it's already happened. I mean, the number of unemployed today actually is higher than it was during the Depression. Okay, and this is literally what's happening to the people because they don't have a place in society. And this is why they're taking drugs. They're depressed. We're talking about our personal acquaintances are growing marijuana. Well, why do you think they're growing it? It's because somebody wants to smoke pot because they're unhappy. And so from the women's perspective, we're talking a little bit, I think, about the male perspective because the man has to basically go out and earn. If you can't earn, nobody's going to want to be with them. But from the woman's perspective, why are they so depressed? I don't know if Lynn is able to chime in here, but I think it's, and this is very cliche to say this, but I think it's the fashion magazines and the stuff that is on television, and we all consume this stuff. there's going to be somebody more beautiful, more intelligent, more successful than you. And if you're not them, you're unhappy. And that's the American sort of model, whereby you have to strive to be at the top. And the bigger the system gets, the lower the chance you're going to be at the top. So in other words, if you're in a town of 100 people, if you're a local auto mechanic, you're probably the best guy in town for that. But if you're living in a metropolitan area, and let's say you love Ferraris or something, let's say you're in Los Angeles. I mean, if you go online and you try to type in Ferrari Los Angeles dealer, you're probably going to get, especially there, you're probably going to get like 25 dealerships. And then what are the odds of you becoming the best one? It's pretty low. I mean, Los Angeles, there's like 7 million people. And so if you extrapolate out that scale to the entire planet that is all integrated in this globalist system, the odds of you being exceptional are almost nothing. And I think this is why people are unhappy.
I think that you're right that being exceptional is an American trait, where you somehow what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I want to be the president, or I want to be a rocket scientist. Well, there's one president at a time usually, but everybody feels like they have to want that. So I think there's something to that for sure. From a woman's perspective, I think it's probably more feelings based. Like, it's not saying I want to be this more beautiful than this lady in the magazine, but it's like, well, if I have a home like this, then I will have a feeling. And you can go and buy your pillows or blankets or whatever in your home, or you can get that promotion or whatever it is, but that feeling never really, you still feel like crap at the end of the day, and so you never get that feeling that you're supposed to have when everything is together.
Why do you think you haven't fallen into that trap, Lynn? I mean, what is it about your life that, compared to the friends that you maybe know that are on this stuff, that you think fills that void?
I don't think that I've fallen or not fallen into any particular trap, but it's more of just knowing that I'm here to do work, and I have things that I want to do and look after my children, and I don't know. I think it would be claiming too much to say that I'm immune to that stuff. I don't. I am on a conscious level.
At this point, though, the boomer generation is, I hate to say this, but they're becoming pretty irrelevant in the conversation. They're still there, but it's like, do I invest time in trying to really convince that guy on the golf course that things are tough out there?
Oh, I don't try to convince anybody.
Yeah, I just can't do it anymore.
We just chit-chat on this podcast for fun.
Hey, Adam, I've spent 3 days this week with a family that's a Gen X family. Well, Gen X and millennial and the greatest generation. Okay, so there's not a boomer in the family.
Yeah,
I'm the only boomer in this household of 4 people. I'm the fifth wheel. So it's a woman that's 90 years old, her youngest child, that's her daughter, and her daughter's daughter, and her daughter's husband. Okay, so the daughter, the granddaughter, the husband all work full-time jobs to try to make ends meet, and they had a ton of work. They needed trees cut out of the yard. They literally needed a ton of mulch moved. They needed a lot of digging done. They needed a chicken coop built. All this shit was just laying around the yard. And they're mad at the husband. The wife has to take an anti-anxiety medication when she wakes up in the morning. Mm-hmm. Then when she gets to work, she's got to take an antidepressant. And when she gets home, she's got to take more anti-anxiety medication. The daughter, the same thing. And what the wife told me, she said, I just wish that I lived in a world where I could find a husband that made enough money so I didn't have to work full time. So I didn't have to have you come here and dig in my yard for 3 days. And
that's the trap. That's the trap that was set for the whole nation, men and women, back when women were put to work and told, well, this is going to give you opportunity. Well, they didn't tell them that it was basically going to double the labor supply and therefore decrease the price of the average earning power of the individual engaged in that market. That's basically supply and demand, economics 101. And it's worse. I mean, there's been immigration waves that have done the same thing, have crushed the price of labor. I call this the four horsemen of the economic apocalypse in this book of mine, but it's basically you've got a huge increase in the labor supply, especially after communism ended and opening up of all those very poor people to the global labor market overseas. So that's outsourcing, offshoring of manufacturing jobs especially. Then you have immigration. Then you have women entering the workforce. And then you have automation. I mean, I don't know in your line of work, James, if you've seen any robots doing that sort of thing. But if you work in a warehouse, if you work in a factory, if you even work in in your line of work, they're automating the checkout station. I know you were working more on the back part of the operation, but they've tried to put machines in front of the store. Amazon has been doing this in their little experimental stores. And so what does that do to the common person? You become a horse. That was sort of the slow build up to my analogy there. But the horse population today is probably about 2 million versus 20 million. So it's shrunk, and you don't need all these people. And this is why the unemployment rate, if you go to Shadow Stats, the real unemployment rate, which is basically how they used to measure it before Reagan changed it and the Labor Department changed it back in the 80s. The real unemployment rate is probably 30%. And that means basically that you're not working, as opposed to not seeking a job, which takes you out of the equation now. So it used to be, if you don't have a job, you're unemployed. Now it means if you're looking for a job and you can't find one, then you're unemployed. So it's very different now. But they're trying to cover up the fact that people don't have things to do. And those that do, they have to compete like crazy because there's all this stuff out there that can basically make them irrelevant in the marketplace, whether it's a guy in India talking on the phone to you or a robot, checking the person out from the cash register. Everybody's struggling to make enough money to survive. Sorry, Lynn, you're going to say.
No, I want to say, if you mean how have I escaped the economic trap? I used to have a serious job and, make as much money as anybody working a serious job in Silicon Valley. But I always knew that I could not put my children in daycare, and I always knew that I was pretty sure that I couldn't do public school either, and private school is extremely expensive. So economically, it's always been that I'd rather look after my kids than go on vacation or wear fancy clothes or whatever. And that's just personal, and I don't know how you generalize that. How do you convince people or women especially about consumerism and just live cheaply? It's not that hard to not go out to eat, to learn how to cook, to look after your house, to look after your children.
Most women I know that are living a lifestyle, where they homeschool especially, but also they're not obsessed with maybe what's in the magazine. They seem to be more religious. And I know you have some religion in your life, but I don't think you would be on any extreme.
And it's
so
not the
fact.
Yeah, and it doesn't come from that for me. It's not there's no overlap, I think, between any religious beliefs and my anti-consumerist. I was poor growing up, and I always wanted to not be poor, but it wasn't because I wanted fancy things or big vacations. I just didn't want to be poor. So once I achieved that, I kind of calmed down with my career and stuff.
The automation and how they're cutting labor costs in the supermarket business, the automation's happening on both ends, in the shipping and the warehousing and at the cash register where...
James, hold on. James, you're going to have to repeat yourself. So start again with checkouts.
Yeah, the supermarket business is automating from the back end in the warehouses and transportation, and they're having trouble with that. Where it's really working well is with the automated checkout, which is generally 8 out of 10 registers. So that has eliminated right there 80% of your help on the front end as far as cashiers go.
And that's 3 million people in the United States employed in checkouts.
And when I was managing this supermarket in Northeast Baltimore, there was the $15 minimum wage was on the table, and the owners that I worked for, they asked me to come up with a plan on how to run the store without going out of business, because your net margin at the end of the year is between 50 cents and $2 for every $100 you bring in. That's it. That's all that you've got left. So if our operating costs went up to 20, if our net profit went down below 20, we were done. So I actually came up with a plan for eliminating 80% of the staff because there was no way these people could afford to buy those self-checkout registers. We were still going to have to get by with cashiers. So I figured out how to run the supermarket by resetting it myself with nothing but cashiers and department managers. What do we just have? One full-timer and one part-timer for each department, and then a handful of cashiers. And that's it. So you could do it. You'd have to cut your volume as well. So that's part of the plan, is you're not going to scrap for that 10% that, that usually fight for. Usually what you're fighting for with all of your extra customer service and inventory control expenditures is to try to just grab another 10% gross so that you can maybe turn that into another 0.5% profit at the end of the year.
Right, but as opposed to the before it was 2 cents, or it was 2 cents for the dollar, and then the margins dropped as you go for that last whatever amount that you're trying to sell. I think so. You're just chopping off that very low margin business.
There's ways, and you're going to see it with if you go to a place called Aldi's, ALDIS.
That's the German chain.
Right. They're basically using the plan that I came up with on my own, because it's really the only thing you can do. It's just a way of absolutely minimizing your labor. And as far as real wages go, people in supermarkets now, in union supermarkets, are topping out at the same hourly rate that I made in 1990.
It's the starkest example of the wage stagnation.
Yeah, I'm talking.
Awful.
$11.40 an hour. That's what I was making in 1990, and that's a top rate in a union supermarket in the same area I worked in now. That's 30 years later?
There is a very famous chart that has been published by many media outlets, mainstream as well as not, but that Tucker Carlson has talked about this. The average median, or not the average, but the median wage, especially of the white man, has basically stagnated for the last 30 plus years. It's gone nowhere, and the cost of living has gone up. So what does that do? People got to work 2-3 jobs. Your spouse has got to work. I mean, if you have a spouse, but women usually don't want to marry a guy if they don't make as much money as she does.
Hey, the 3 people that are working full-time jobs that I talked about, that are all pulling their money to live in the same house with their grandmother, they're all working over 40 hours. They're all exhausted. They all have a lot of back pain and other physical issues. I'm a 56-year-old guy. I'm like 10 to 30 years older than these people. And I'm more fit than all of them put together. And I've been beat up hundreds of times and had a bunch of work injuries. But they have these office jobs where they've got to sit in a chair for 10 or 11 hours a day, and they're physically exhausted when they get home.
You know who's also healthy? It's the Amish. They have the same life expectancy as an American. And you know what the Amish don't have, though? It's all the quote-unquote fancy medical care that Americans do. They don't do any of that. But their lifestyle is so much healthier, they don't need it. I mean, it's really absurd. This is why I've kind of gone off the grid and tried to learn how to grow food. I mean, what am I getting for all this? I went to a really good school, too.
I didn't know that I was going to.
The world doesn't offer me anything.
I didn't know I was going to be physically better off having emptied trucks and lifting cases of groceries for 75 hours a week for 38 years. I'm physically better off than people that do an office job for less time than that. I mean, these people are broken after 30 years of sitting in a chair.
And you know why they do it? It's some of them do it, because it pays them. But a lot of people, they pursue white collar work because it's perceived to have higher status. That's the biggest theme that I think this guy named Spandrel writes about. He's the guy who came up with this term bio-Leninism also, but we don't have to get into that. But it's basically the reasons humans do a lot of things after obviously your basic needs are met, like food, shelter, things like that. It's all a status competition. It's a sexual marketplace, and the people who are the rock stars are going to get all the babes, and the most spectacularly beautiful woman is going to get all the billionaires, trying to date her. And so it's a pecking order, and our culture has sort of taught us that education, being a lawyer, LA Law, whatever, Murphy Brown, doing that type of thing is good. And so this is why everybody goes to college now, and why college graduates make less money than a guy who is a plumber. It's supply and demand. Like the surplus of labor in white collar professions is so profound that now I'm doing better doing construction than I did working in technology. I mean, it's so absurd. It's so backwards. It doesn't have to be like this, but our country's run by people with billions of dollars, and so they make a lot of money doing this. It's very simple. And so
there's so many either unintended consequences or just weird incentives. The whole college credentialism factory where people are just sucked out of high school directly into college. Half these people can barely read or speak English or even do rudimentary mathematics, And Wayhan got suspended. Adam, I don't know if you've been on Twitter today, but
today he got suspended. I heard that people were attacking him, but that's too bad.
He's suspended. Yeah.
Yeah, he needs to study harder.
He needs to work on his differential equations. Yeah. So
that's right.
But college is supposed to be hard, right? It's supposed to be, if you want the life of an academic, you have to really be different and special. And now we have all these disciplines which they're not disciplines,
The nicest parts of, it's funny too, because I grew up middle class, and I remember going to college, being really excited and meeting all these smart people, which was good. It was a good experience to be around people smarter than me, actually. It taught me some humility and taught me to recognize, strengths and weaknesses in myself and others. But besides that, I just noticed how nice college towns are. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. And the town I lived in, the surrounding area was a dump. But all the professors lived up in the hills, and they had really, really, really nice houses. And I was like, gosh, okay, where do I go from here? And it's like, I didn't see the opportunities there. And so it was like you grew up middle class, you go to this really nice fake artificial bubble land that is called college, and then you don't score that job at Goldman Sachs or whatever it is that's going to leap you into the next level where you can basically afford a house like a college professor could. And then you're like, oh, I'm living next to people from other countries who don't speak English, and this is worse than my parents had it. And yet I have more education than them. Like, what's wrong with this picture? And then the people who control the narrative, the media, that sort of chattering class of people that is used as propaganda, let's just be blunt about it, and they live very well. And so they don't understand why a lot of the people that don't get those chances, or actually are not willing to do what the people in the media do, which in my opinion is basically they're paid to read the script or lie. They're not truth seekers. They're not truth tellers, that's for sure. This is why there's that huge disconnect in our society. You have we had on the Z-Man, another Baltimore
nice
resident, and he basically calls these people cloud people as opposed to being down to earth. And this is the people that it kind of are the bureaucratic functionaries, the apparatchiks, to use the Soviet term. But that's what they are. That's exactly what they are. They're these intelligentsia people that are controlling the levers, that are administering the chattel classes. whether it's through the levers of the law, whether it's through the levers of the city hall that gives dictates to the police not to stand down when Trump is having a campaign rally in San Jose, and all the I actually know some people that actually got beat up and their cars destroyed by people who were protesting the mere presence of the aspirational president at the time. This was like 2015, and they're given stand down orders. This is going on in Portland, where this cloud person guy from Stanford is the mayor. He looks nothing like a normal person. He has all the right degrees, yet he has no clue what the normal person is going through. And he tells the police not to do anything when Andy No, the Vietnamese gay reporter, gets beat up by Antifa. And then you've got the media basically bullying people into hating their president, hating anybody who raises the question, why am I giving free health care to this guy from Somalia? As far as I know, Somalia was actually engaged in its own slave trade. They were not being captured like the West Africans were. Somalia is on the eastern side of Africa, and Africa is a huge continent, bigger than the width of the United States. So there's no way those people were suffering under white privilege of the 18th century. There was, people are asking this question, and like, why are we paying these people free healthcare, welfare, free housing? There's a guy in West Virginia on Twitter. I don't know if you've seen it, Lynn, but he's wearing one of those like yellow vests, kind of, I think, inspired by the French protests going on over there. So he has kind of like a hazard jacket on. And he's basically standing in front of this giant new housing development. It's in West Virginia. And he's saying, hey, did you know that this is being funded by West Virginian, like the county he's in, taxpayers, to the tune of $30 million? There used to be black and white Americans living in this neighborhood that were told to move to get replaced by Muslims coming in that are given free housing, free health care. People, wake up. You need to realize this is what is happening. And so the media tells you that this person is racist, is xenophobic, is wrong to be questioning why he's being told to move aside and get replaced at his own expense. I mean, this is how it works. This is how people are enslaved. It's a psychological prison we're in, if not a real one. We have the largest prison population in the world. I mean, I grew up, as like a Republican, and I'm listening to myself talk, and I sound like a leftist. And I don't have any love for the left, but for God's sakes, I mean, we're slaves. It's crazy. It's crazy. I just want to have the opportunity to just be left alone and raise a family. That's it. Really simple.
Right. It's that left alone idea, though, that's so dangerous, because that's how I feel too, and that's how so many conservative is the wrong word, but right-wing people just want to be left alone, but that's a big mistake. I'm not trying to Fed post, but
Adam, before you were talking about the Roman Empire, the medieval serf, which was a slave, was the descendant of the Roman citizen, and the Imperial Roman government brought in German tribesmen as their military, and those German tribesmen ended up having the former Roman citizens as their slaves. That's how it evolved. I mean, it's a population replacement thing, very similar.
Exactly. That's how you incentivize the periphery of the empire to join the empire. You give them the promises of becoming a citizen, and they basically take the place of the previous people who are at the center of society. I mean, at very least, it dilutes the previous person's power. I mean, the United States, okay, when it was first starting out, the House of Representatives has been stuck at 535 or something like that, or I don't remember the exact number, but it's maybe 400. But the point is, the number of people in the House and the Senate's 100, but the House is supposed to be proportionately larger and more, you add more people given the population of the state in which they originate, kind of thing. But they've capped the number of people coming in, and even if they add more, I mean, it would just become a cacophony of people. I don't think you can really run a system with more and more people without negative communication effects. But the point is, when the United States started off, there was like the ratio was like one person or there was one House representative for every like 30,000 people in the country. Okay. Now it's like almost one representative for like 1 million.
Yeah, this is in your book too.
Yeah. It's not quite 1 million, but it's like 700,000 or something. But the amount of proportionate say we have has just mathematically gone down by like 20 times at least. And so it's just obvious that growing the size from the point of view, again, of the average normal person, growing the size of the system is not to their benefit because they are diluted. It is to the benefit of the people at the top because the larger the system gets, the more money and power they have control over. But you have to be at the top. That's the problem. And that's what's happened. I mean, we're basically a system that rewards the wealthiest people, and they buy influence. There's another study that I cited this in the book, but also on the last call that we had with ZMAB. But this is a study out of Princeton, I believe, by the two authors. Last names are Gillens and Page, and they did a very thorough analysis of public opinion, and they broke it down by the people who are in the wealthiest, like 1%, and then the rest of us. And then they correlated the opinions of those people with public policy changes. And there was almost zero, like almost nothing in public policy having to do with the opinion of the lower 99%. All of it had to do with the top 1%. And the study came out about 2012 or so. But Gillens and Page, it's a very famous study. So that tells you that it's almost provable to the point where you can like numerically quantify all this stuff. I mean, we all get the sense that like our say doesn't matter. I mean, every time we vote for a president, I mean, nothing changes, whether it's Democrat, Republican. So people need to realize that, number one. But number two, if you don't have $1 billion, you're not getting anything done on a public policy standpoint. You just aren't on a national level, at least. That's what this study was focused on, I believe.
I want to change the topic a little bit because we've really been talking about end of empire stuff, and that is what your book is all about. And I think it's worth talking about more, especially because we have to realize that it's not just that America is like Rome, but that America is in its decline. We're in our decline as an empire, and what that means to us. So we will return to that, I'm sure. But what I want to get you guys to talk about is the question of anonymity. All right, we have James, and James has been out in public with your real name since you've started writing. Although maybe when you started writing, you weren't did not anticipate. Well, you anticipated many things actually, but then Adam Smith is not your real name. If people don't know that, I don't know what your real name is.
I'm not 270 years old or whatever.
All right, so I want you guys to talk about what this is like with your name out, and especially for you, Adam, having this really huge body of work that is perceived as very offensive by YouTube because you guys got axed. I perceive it as quite mild and moderate. And
I do too.
Yeah,
I really do.
I do.
I mean,
honestly.
I'm not just saying that because this is sort of like what you would say if you're trying to defend yourself. I'm a normal guy. I mean, in my opinion, I'm not that extreme. I just say things that I think are true, and I think most people don't do that. I think that's the main difference. But James, how do you feel about being out there in the open?
I wrote 3 books that 2 of them got published in 2000 and 2001. And when I decided to get a management job so I could put my youngest son through college, I had to stop writing for 4 years. I knew it. I knew what was in the first couple books I'd written in 98 and 99. And I remember one of my employees wanted me to coach him because he knew I had been a stick fighter, and he had found the Logic of Steel book, which just a year ago was banned by Amazon. And he had it on his register, and a cold chill just went down my spine. I knew if any of my African American customers got a hold of that book, in which I accurately quoted African American men who I had interviewed about the violent experiences, that my job was over. And I wasn't going to be able to finish putting my son through school. So I told him, I said, I'll coach you, but I can never catch you in this store with that book with my name on it again. What's in that book? My employees and employers, they can't know about that. So that was in 2006. And I just instinctively knew, I quoted Mr. Kenny describing himself as the N-word. That would have been enough to end my job right then if that book would have ended up on my employer's desk. Right. So I always knew that once I started writing again, that I was not going to be employable. And and to force myself to write full time, I intentionally turned down 9 job offers that I got immediately after I resigned from this one job position.
Wow.
Okay, so I needed to really burn bridges, and I even quit in a way that would, advertise me as somebody you didn't want running your operation. I did that on purpose to make sure that I'd be stuck out there as a peasant and be encouraged to write, because I finally decided my son was through college, and I wanted to write. So I wouldn't have done anything differently if the political situation was more intense 15 years ago or 20 years ago when I started writing, because I already knew that I was going to end up being persona non grata with my family and with people in general based on what I was writing in the late 1990s.
Well, the family thing is particularly hard, I would imagine, and I can't emphasize enough how sad that makes me. That I've met you, and you're a very generous person. I don't understand why they can't understand what the media tells them about what they're supposed to think about you is if not wrong, at least it doesn't apply to you per se. I don't see how they can't divide those two. They can't separate those out.
Yeah. I'm a bad guy to my family. If somebody tries to break into their house, I'm the first person they call, or if one of my sons is going out of town, he wants me there with his wife when he's not there. But every time things are hunky-dory and cozy, they don't need me around as a reminder that, the world disapproves of the last name that I gave them. So
yeah, I don't mean to rake that over the coals. I just had to tell you that it shocks me. Here's the thing that I think might bridge what we're both sort of trying to do here. I have not told to the full extent of what I do to a lot of people I know personally. Some people I know I can trust with that, and I do tell them that. But I got to tell you, if I had a family, and I'm trying to get to this point, but it's basically, I don't want to be leading a double life. And I know a lot of people that are actually pretty well known in this thing, and they do keep their identity separate, or their sort of dissident identity separate from their public identity. But their family knows what they do. I mean, there's no way around it. You can't separate those out. And I don't want to have to be hiding anything. I'm certainly not ashamed of what I do. That's not the issue. But what I wanted to say, though, is I don't want to bring the type of heat. And again, we're not criminals. We literally have broken no law. But to anybody listening who thinks that that's keeping you safe, it's not enough. I mean, it justifies the system we live under justifies people losing their jobs. I mean, we've both been on Rebel Yell before, and a lot of those guys have been targeted, and for that reason, to basically limit their employment prospects for basically expressing their free thoughts. They've done nothing illegal. So that's not a defense in practical terms. It doesn't protect you. But I don't want to bring that to my family. And what I also don't want to bring is the amount of frustration and anger that I've seen break up a lot of good relationships, especially coming from the men, where they're frustrated and they understand what's going on and they want to communicate that to their partner. And the partner basically they don't quite want to listen to it, or they do, but what they really don't like is seeing their male partner in a frustrated place, because that makes them look weak. They find that unattractive and they feel less secure. And I don't want to bring that to a relationship or my children if I can get that far. I don't want to bring that to them. And I'm not in this to bring people misery. I'm really in this to make life livable. And the cosmopolitan life is just, it's anti-family. It's not something you can do in a healthy way, in a long-term way. I mean, if you want your kids taken over by the education system, if you want them being told to come home and question and interrogate their parents like the Chinese did in the Cultural Revolution about, well, when I was younger, I really identified as the opposite sex, but you didn't allow me to do that, so therefore, blah blah blah. You need to give me a car. I mean, start like blackmailing their parents with this communist propaganda garbage that they're teaching kids now. I mean, I don't want that to happen. So I'm really trying to, and I tried to do this in the book, and it's a very, very tall order, but I'm trying to give examples of communities that have basically figured out a way to get their dependency on the system that is basically, we've already talked about how it's making us sick, unhappy, economically worse off than our parents and our grandparents, even, how to get off that and then be self-sufficient and happy. And there, communities like the Amish, the Mormons have done a good job at this. Those are the two I always cite. But I'm really, really trying to do that first and foremost before I really try to drag a family into this, because I know the system doesn't want that, because if people do that, and if they're successful at that, the system loses its power. It loses its slaves. They're running off the plantation, as you call America, the plantation America. So I think that's really how you reconcile these two things. You want to basically create a system whereby you're kind of untouchable, and that's not something you can ever assume with 100% certainty, but I think it's a goal all of us need to strive for more, because and this is a Malcolm X quote, but when you're dependent upon your enemy for your job, you're in trouble. And I think that's where a lot of people are at.
Yeah. See, anonymity for, my whole writing career was, post-economic life, really. I wrote a couple books when I was injured. They were niche books, but my serious writing's all been done after I decided to stop trying to be economically successful. It's basically just my own epitaph that I've been writing. So, I use my name, but any younger guys that are into thinking in a counterculture way, I recommend they all use pen names. Pen names are very ancient. Women would use them. There were writers like Mary Shelley before it was socially acceptable for women to write. I think it's a good idea. And even with people who write me, I do dialogues on the site. When people write me in with questions, if it's a new person and all they left me with was their real name, I'll give them a day to come up with a fake name, or I'll come up with a fake name for them. I don't want to put anybody's name out there. It's that bad. And I know that I actually talked to a guy that retired from an intelligence agency recently, who I hadn't seen basically for his whole career. And then we got back together again after he retired. And, he told me that I'm definitely under observation, my writing. He said just based on the type of people that would be attracted to me.
James, as soon as you said that, the internet connection broke up. So there must be. Are you still there?
I wouldn't want to end up being data minded.
Hey, James, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the Stasi were listening.
Okay.
They just interrupted.
Okay.
The internet connection just got bad for 30 seconds.
Okay.
So thanks, government.
Well, one thing I recommend for unpopular ideas, well, two things. One is people like Adam and I are thought criminals. I mean, this is a real thing. We're thought criminals. We're considered bad because of the types of things we choose to think about, not even our conclusions, but just that we're interested in certain subjects. You could take a page out of the books of people who are minorities, have been minorities in this society in the past, and have been involved in real crime. They do not discuss business with their women because ultimately, if you have a child with a woman, she will always throw you under the bus for that child. And all the government has to do is get a hold of her and say, tell us what you know.
Right.
So the Italians did it, the Irish did it, the blacks did it. You don't let your women know what goes between your ears. That's really important to you.
And it's for everybody's benefit. I mean, frankly, and I don't even blame women for leaving a guy who's spoiled meat at that point. It's just how our species survives. It's brutal. We're raised in this blue pill, to use a stupid manosphere term, but we're taught that that's not to be expected. But if you've lived a little bit, it is to be expected. And if you look at history, that's how it works. And it's for the women's safety, the children's safety, to not tell them that. I mean, there's no benefit to it. But I don't know how you live with somebody and you're not doing anything actually illegal, which we're not doing anything actually illegal, and not just talk about things. I guess what it really comes to is that's for the Elks Club, as I always say. Like, that's where you talk to the guys about politics, and then you keep it to the actual important stuff about raising a family between you and your wife. And you don't need to delve into the intricacies of Syria's enmeshment with the Kurdish rebels. I mean, who gives a shit at the end of the day with regard to your kids' education and that? It has no bearing, really, on your own practical existence. And so I think from that point of view, yeah, you really shouldn't even bring it up. I mean, there's no benefit to anybody. So I think that's one way to do it. I don't know how a woman would feel being told that. I mean, I'm not trying to like belittle anybody, but it really is it's a survival strategy for everybody. And it's like, I just don't know how you bring that up.
I miss part of that, but I think if you're talking about like a mafia wife, that's
the analogy, but we're not.
Well, that's the analogy, but she's not stupid, right?
Yeah. No, that's not the implication.
No, I know, but so what I'm saying is that she knows that she doesn't need to know that stuff, and she's better off knowing, and she doesn't want to know, right? Right. I mean, I feel that way a lot about things. Like, this is just not my problem. I mean, it doesn't have to be high stakes stuff, and I'm not just talking about marriage. I'm talking about people who tell me things that I don't care about, that I don't want to know. I mean, maybe I'm antisocial, but you have to have a sphere of influence that you care about, and you only have so much bandwidth, or at least I do. Like, I don't have the bandwidth to follow celebrity gossip and office politics for people that it's not my workplace, or like, I just don't. So whatever you're talking with your wife about, and it will obviously vary, but it makes sense to know that you're not going to learn everything, and that's okay.
Yeah, you have to do it in a way that obviously is not creating a sense that you're withholding important or critical information. It's really just our focus is in. We all have to believe this, that we're focused on the family. And James, you're an author, this is what you do because you're passionate about it, but really it should not have any negative impact on your family, and so you try to keep those compartmentalized. And I would hope that a woman could understand and respect that, because really what you're saying is, this is for everybody's benefit. This is for the unit's benefit. I don't want to distract what we're trying to do together. And I hope you don't think what I'm doing is distracting from that either, because it's I don't know. I mean, that's really the only problem. It's like, okay, if what you're doing is bringing risks to the family, then, and I was talking to a friend of mine today actually about this. Like, he got doxxed. That's the term when basically someone unmasks your pen name and shows the real name behind it, and then tries to get your employer to fire you and get you ostracized, basically. And I asked him, how's your wife dealing with this? And he said basically she's angry. And I said, well, is she angry at you, or is she angry at the guy who doxed you? And she said, well, mostly at the guy who doxed me. And I'm like, well, that's good. That's a good woman. I mean, she's standing by you, and I'd be thankful for that. And he's like, yes, small wins. But I'd be worried about that, if I was really engaged in this stuff. And I'm not. I don't really engage in public that much anymore. I just do it, online. But I still worry about this. Like, I don't know how it's really going to work. I mean, Lynn, I'm listening to any thoughts you have on this. But it's funny because I don't know what your husband's interest level is in all this stuff, but most women are on the other side of the coin. It's like mostly the men are looking at dissident politics. But in your case, you're more interested in it, I would assume.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can speak to it.
I tried to tell myself that even if it all came out, like if someone in real life, and my family knows about the podcast and the books and stuff, but there's so little interest in it in real life that I wonder, it's like someone has to get some outrage going and call your employer and stuff, because honestly, how many people in real life are going to sit here and listen to these long podcasts and try to figure out what we're talking about? I don't know, maybe I'm in denial, but and there's nothing, I haven't really said stuff that too much, I don't think I have, that I don't tell people.
What would happen though, and it's really, nobody's going to listen to all that stuff, and even the people that are like writing a hit piece on you would listen to everything, but what they'll do is they'll look for keywords, and then they'll say, this person said this. They'll put it out of context, or they'll try to spin it so it's horrible, and then they'll compress it into an article. That's what they did with Sam Hyde. Okay, this piece of garbage, Joe Bernstein from BuzzFeed, which is a completely laughable piece of journalism platform to begin with. All he does is sits in this dumb office, and he basically tries to attack people that are enemies of his established political order. And he gets paid for that. We don't get paid for this, all right? And we're doing at some great risk to our own personal lives. And so I have no respect for him as a human being, to be honest.
No
but
way.
Basically got Sam Hyde thrown off of a amazing TV show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's truly groundbreaking stuff. If you've never seen World Peace, I mean, it's one of the most original, well done pieces of comedy I've seen in the last 10 years at least. Got it thrown off because he did exactly what I'm describing here. He'll basically look for the littlest of things, and to be honest, like they were edgy guys and they would push it, but it really was done in a very smart, intelligent way, and it really wasn't that anybody. Well, maybe I'm off base in understanding how most people take these things, but it had great ratings. So the network had no problem with it, but what they did was they created this campaign where they got all the advertisers to start getting scared. They did this blitz. All these Jewish people basically were emailing for a week straight, just nonstop. And it's a very small number of people that it even takes to do this. You just have to do it in a very intense way to all the different advertisers. Oh, did you hear about the Nazis on TV? I mean, do you want to have your brand associated with that? That's all they have to do. And then the network gets scared, and then they tick them off. And so I don't think you guys are going to get into such hot water. I mean, we're not nearly as big, and you guys aren't as big, and so I don't think that's going to happen to you. But that's all they need to do. All they need to do is create a single article on. Even on a joke platform like BuzzFeed.
But the thing is, you do have to be like at least a little bit important for someone to notice. But actually, I know a guy on Twitter. I had some DMs with a guy who's like just a kind of regional attorney, and someone found his Twitter feed and made a fuss over it. But you also have to go and find. Or someone has to find you and get mad. This is what I think. It has to be someone really motivated, like this BuzzFeed reporter. You know, you have to have a motivated hater, basically, to do it.
Sure. Well, they just did it to Rebel Yell, and you guys were.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've been on there. James has
No,
been on Rebel.
yeah. No, not me, yeah.
They were, I asked my friend. I'm like, are you guys like? I mean, I like what you guys do, but why do they care? Like, you're not that big. I mean, you're big, but it's like, come on, like, really? Like, are they that desperate? And he's just like, yeah, you know, they're low-hanging fruit or something.
My guess is, too, because they're somewhat connected to TRS, and TRS is big.
Yeah, I think that's
But I
probably
have no idea the lore. Like, I didn't even know that until I read the archived version of the, I don't know who printed it, like ADL printed it against Rebel Yell. I don't remember, but, you know, I'm reading
SPLC.
So I'm reading all this, like, intricate history of these groups I didn't even know. I don't know internet lore. I don't know TRS. I don't know those people. I never listened to any of their podcasts, so I don't know anything about it, but that's my guess. I don't know.
Yep.
But yeah, you read through this SPLC, like, this is a hate group. Why? You read through, and there's not even anything there. You know, they wrote this long article, and I just couldn't find one thing that was really even edgy.
They're scary guys with the Confederate flag. That's
Right.
the sort of meme that they're going to tap into. That's the image that Hollywood programmed us to have in our minds through many, you know, I can't name the films or television shows, but they've definitely seen enough on the screen, the mainstream screen, not the internet screen, of, you know, in the middle of the night, you know, the guy in the pickup truck with the Confederate sticker on his bumper is going to out to get you, poor black guy, you know, and they're trying to associate that with these guys. And these guys are all law-abiding guys. They're really gentlemen, actually. If you ever talk to them, they're very respectful, and they wouldn't do anything like that. But it doesn't matter, you know, that what they're saying is too dangerous, apparently. So all they're saying is basically, look, we don't want to be part of your empire anymore. Well, an empire can't have that, because if its citizens want less to do with the empire, then it loses power. And the SPLC is basically a Jewish hate group that hates anybody who attacks the power structure, which is not entirely Jewish, no question, but it has a lot of Zionist influence. I mean, not every single, but I would say most major politicians has to go kiss the ring at AIPAC every year. I mean, there's collages that people have put together of presidents, presidential candidates, secretaries of state. Hillary Clinton was there, Obama was there, Trump has been there. They've all been to AIPAC. And then the question is, well, what would they say if any other country was doing this other than Israel? If it was Russia, you know, if it was China, and these people would be considered traitors. But in America, we were taught that Israel's our greatest ally, so that's okay. So when people like TRS and Rebel Yell are noticing that basically the people in the financial system and the media system and the State Department all have names that have precious metals in them, then they're called anti-Semites. And SPLC basically gets $30 million from Sheldon Adelson or whoever funds them to go out and create hit pieces on people who notice that actually the people in power are very much of this tribe. They can't have that. The Israeli intelligence agency is called Mossad, and they have a saying, because Israel's a very small country, the number of Jews in the world is very small, and they don't have a big army. They have a lot of smart people, a lot of powerful people, but they know that they don't have the giant armies that the Arab countries do. They don't have the giant manpower that China or even the United States has. But what they recognize is that their power is their intelligence and their network. And so their motto is war by deception, not war by overwhelming force or overwhelming strategic command of the battlefield or something. It's by deception. And so that's what these people do. And they're very good at it.
It's a good reason to write novels and stories instead of self-help books when certain people gain power. I've been hoping I'll be done on my history books by the time there's a change in power. If not, I might just stop writing them and just flip over to just writing fiction.
All right. Did you guys cover the woman question when I was
not too much?
You got into a little bit. Well,
I have a lot I'd like to discuss with.
Yeah, let's do it. I want to bring it up because it's been we have a mutual, Adam and I have a mutual friend on Twitter, Katie McCoy. I don't know, she has different handles, but it's Katie McCoy. And she's been pushing this angle lately, and we've both been discussing it with her. And I similar to the TRS thing, I feel that there's some lore that I don't know about. Her assertion, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but it's basically that the alt-right or the dissident right or whatever you want has like this really dysfunctional level of misogyny and chases women out of our side of the movement, and simultaneously, and this is really weird, they like thirst after the leftist women. Are you aware of these Red Scare girls, Adam?
No, I followed everything you said until that last part. What is this thirst for leftist women? I do not share this. What is this?
There's this podcast called Red Scare, and these two girls on it, and they're...
Oh, are they okay? So let me just I don't know if you know this term. You know what a thought is? Are they thoughts?
They're not exactly thoughts. I mean, they're definitely public with their image, and they're cute girls. But they do this podcast, and I've never listened to it, but it's supposedly some kind of leftward critique, critiquing the left from the left, where they are, I don't know if they talk about soy boys or I don't know, but they're basically, like, to give you an idea, the gays really love them. Like, we have a couple of gay guys on the right, and they think they're great. So, but there is
just the girls.
Yeah, it's girl talk. But anyway, you don't have to address that part of it. But that's part of her point, is that somehow you guys can be nice to these leftist girls, but you can't be nice to girls on our own side.
Well, look, if a girl's good looking, there's a part of the male brain that. So I learned this from Stefan Molyneux. It's funny, but if a male is in the presence of a beautiful woman, his brain actually turns off.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
I don't know what these women look like. I've never heard of them, but I would imagine if they're pretty, that's probably the biggest reason. What they're saying is, unfortunately, ladies, always going to be secondary to how you look. And it doesn't mean that what you're saying is bad, or if it's good, then it's great. I've never met Lynn, and I listened to her. I like what she has to say. So, we can still listen to women, but that's all my point is. It's like, look, a male is biologically geared to look for fertile women, and that's usually young, attractive women who are going to bear children for him. So there's who's that, a picture? Lynn is holding up her phone.
Yeah,
she looks attractive, I guess, or is that the Iranian shooter of YouTube? I can't tell. Are you showing us pictures, Lynn, of the YouTubers?
Well, I've asked Lynn before to never ask me my opinion of a woman's statements or academic qualifications without showing me a picture. So, that's okay. Interesting. I only care what they look like. I mean, so I can't possibly judge the value of what's between their ears without seeing them.
Well, the funny part about all this is that you, James, and you, Adam, and many other gentlemen have always been gentlemen to me. We don't have a huge audience here at Crackpot Industries. If you're talking about podcasts or books or whatever, it's like we do modest numbers. But everybody's nice, and I don't know what it is exactly that she's complaining or that.
I do. She's not wrong. I think what I just recently became aware of her, and we posted something on our blog, The American Sun, that I think offended her, and it was about it's a new acronym, awful. It stands
she doesn't
for,
like awful?
It stands for like
affluent white female liberal.
Yeah, I think it's.
I thought Second City Bureaucrat came up with that. It's so good.
Probably he's very sharp, and so
He's
I'd be
so
not
good, yeah.
surprised if he coined that. But so that's where I became kind of aware of her views. I've seen her before on Twitter, but I never really like clued into that she was bothered by some of this perspective of the right on women. But that's when I actually started engaging with her a little bit on Twitter, and I tried to just understand what she was saying, and that was kind of my first question to her. I just asked her, what I'd have to pull it up and remember all the details, but basically I was like, what did you want to see here? And then I was talking to her, and basically what my impression is that she sees a lot, and I'm talking to you, Lynn, about hearing about what you've also seen from her, is my impression is that she thinks that a lot of the guys on the alt-right or the dissident right are viewing women as dangerous, and they must be put in burqas or something. That would be kind of an hyperbolic extreme, where I have heard people talk about white Sharia, which I don't endorse. I think it's kind of stupid. And frankly, a lot of it was actually done as a joke initially, and I think people started taking it seriously without understanding that.
That's part of her point, is that the memes take on a life of their own.
Okay, that's the internet. I mean, don't blame men for that. That's just the internet. But it's, but to her credit, 80% credit, like, she's picking up on a lot of guys basically trash talking women, and I don't endorse that as a blanket statement on all women, but we have this thing called Naxalt. If you know what that is, Lynn, have you heard that? Have you heard that
James,
term?
Yeah, it means not all X are like that. So if I say, men do whatever, it's not all men are like that, not all women are like that, it's etc.
Right, and you can put in the place of the X in that acronym, you could put in not all blacks are like that, not all Jews are like that, not all white people are like that, not all Asians.
And it's true. It's always true.
Of course it is. No,
Yeah.
of course. It's always true. I mean, there's always going to be differences. I mean, duh. If you've walked outside your door, everybody's different. But the point that people have to make, because, okay, when you're having a conversation and you're talking about a group of people, I mean, we have to recognize there's groups of people, right? They're a group for a reason, because they have similarities. Doesn't mean they're all the same, but they have similarities. You're going to talk about the group just for reasons of efficacy of communication as a group. You're not going to say, well, this group that is half the world, which is 3.5 billion people, let me go through the list. I mean, you die before you got to the list.
Yeah, you have to be able to communicate with some efficiency. Yeah.
So, of course, you can talk about, okay, women do this. Okay, yes, we're not targeting anybody in particular. And I think also, and she's picking up correctly that, that there's a lot of targeting on all these people that maybe she's taking a little bit too closely to herself. Which is not the intent of, I think, most people. It's just basically they're frustrated and they pick up on the pattern of this happening a lot, of having women do things they don't like. And women do the same thing about men. Okay, so this is just how people talk. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, and there is something to what she's seeing, though, is that I personally have gotten very cynical on male and female relationships, not because I don't think they're possible or I don't see good ones out there, but the modern relationship structure has become very corrupted. And so I think I could speak for a lot of other men in that sense, that they don't trust modern women because of divorce laws, because of alimony, because of the media telling them that, men are the source of all evil, especially white men. So there's a lot of distrust and there's a lot of frustration from feminism. And that's kind of where the manosphere kind of got its legs. People like Roosh, people like Hartiste, who was thrown off of the internet recently, for basically calling out women on their bullshit. And women call out men on their bullshit all the time. And I think that's an important function of society to call people out on their bullshit. But when it's one side that's only allowed to criticize the other side, you have a problem. So I think it's only fair that after years, decades of feminist funding in universities, like, okay, the fact that we have a feminist department, women's studies, that's what that is. Well, where's men's studies? There isn't any. So it's assumed that, we're not allowed one, or I think men's studies would be a stupid waste of money. I think women's studies is a stupid waste of money, frankly. But I don't say that out of deference to women. But at the least you could let us do is complain on the internet about it. So,
I think that's totally fair. Complaining on the internet would never prevent you from doing that. I think that what we see is missed opportunity and sometimes like missing talents. I mean, it's so it's easy and funny and true to say that women shouldn't vote. Okay, fine, I don't care. But it's also true to say that the vast majority of men shouldn't vote.
I
right?
100% agree.
So,
I've said that a long time, and
yeah.
I'm glad you said it that right. Okay. I think families should have the right to vote.
A family should have the right to vote, and but the point is that if you're going to write off half of people, you're going to write off some certain amount of talent, and opportunity.
Sure. Well, the thing about women and talent, and this is something I didn't understand, honestly, until I got older, because when you're younger, I'll live. I mean, I was always told this as a young kid. Oh, you young kids, you think you're going to live forever. Well, no, obviously I'm not going to live forever, but you don't understand the pressure of time until you get older. You really don't. And especially for women, they don't get it because it comes sooner. For men, it's a little bit later. Where they can have kids basically until much later in life. For women, if you don't have them by 30, 35, 90% of your eggs are dead, and so your odds of conceiving are much lower. And the culture doesn't teach you that, and it should. It is an absolute crime, and it's intentional. It's for reasons of getting women to the workforce, for cheaper labor. It's also for population reduction, in my opinion. There's also for breaking up families, which then leads to a very weak society, which is what we have. I mean, look at the black community. Look what happened to them after they basically jailed all the fathers and they gave welfare to the mothers. The family's gone. It's non-existent. The divorce rate, the marriage rate doesn't even it's not even there. So they don't even have the opportunity to get divorced. The out of wedlock births are something like 70% in the black community. Community is such a stupid term. I mean, they're not like one group, but it's like, obviously, there's a pattern. Compared to Asian Americans, I think the out of wedlock birth rate is something like 15%, 10%. I mean, it's much healthier. Call me a traditionalist, but I think it's good to have kids when you're in a marriage. So, forget how I got onto this, but what were we just talking about, Lynn? Sorry.
I'm not sure what I was talking about. I just took a call from my brother asking for cooking advice, so my other phone.
Please don't let us interrupt.
I'm still wondering who was in that picture. You showed me a picture on your smartphone.
I showed you a picture. She's too skinny for you.
Well, what was I supposed to know about this chick?
That was she and another skinny girl are they do a little podcast. Well, it's a big podcast, and they have, I don't know, a huge listenership, and it's grown really fast. And it's basically these two, and I've never listened to it, okay, but they call it Red Scare, and it's like two leftist chicks who are talking about politics and about culture, like they're fans of Camille Paglia, and
yeah, I'm a fan of hers. She's all right.
I can take some of Camille Paglia, but
some of it. Yeah.
I get tired pretty quick of her. I mean,
she talks too fast.
Well, the thing is, like,
does it on purpose.
The thing is, the woman question. These are two single girls in New York City with no children.
Exactly.
So are they women? Okay, yes, they have XX chromosomes, but I've been on video here with you, right? And this is what women do. This is honestly, like, I'm sorry, if you don't have children, I understand not everyone
Well,
has
they're
children.
girls. You're a woman.
Right.
They're girls.
Right. So, and that's part of it. Like, girls are obviously more attractive than women in that sense. Young women who are single. I mean, you don't want to marry a middle-aged woman with kids. You need to go start your own family,
Usually,
right?
yeah.
Well, you need a family of your own, and that's.
Right.
I hope that is what's in your future.
Yeah.
But if you're going to only listen to women who are attractive or who are out in public, you're going to miss important things. And
Right.
I really don't care about this personally. Okay. I am not out here hoping for a bigger audience. I really like it makes me uncomfortable to think that we could ever have a big audience, to be honest with you. James, I want you to sell 1 million books, but it's not my thing to be a public figure or to have my picture online or whatever. So I don't really know. I don't have an answer to the question. The question of, like, what can I contribute as a woman? Well, here I am contributing as a woman. It's not capital letter as a woman, but it's just what I'm doing.
Right. Well, it is remarkable, though, because there are, I think, fewer outspoken or publicly speaking women who share as much of the family perspective as you do, Lynn, and in our thing. And a lot of these women, and this is actually the other reason why, and I'm hopefully clarify or hopefully try to share some of the male perspective on this with Katie and people and women like that who get upset, which I understand. Actually, I can empathize with that they might feel excluded by men in this thing. But 2 points. Okay, number one, men created this thing because we felt the pain, and women, of course, feel their own pain in their own way. But I don't want to sound like Lena Dunham right now when she goes out and says white men cannot understand suffering because they're not women. I'm not going to tell women that she's an idiot.
Yeah.
She's such a ugly, stupid woman. But I can't stand her. But anyway, everybody makes fun of her. But the point is, she basically told men that they can't understand suffering. I'm not going to tell women they can't understand suffering. That's a ridiculous claim. But the reason all these guys got together, and you go to these sausage fest events where it's all guys, I mean, why do you think that's the case? It's because they're all there because they felt it themselves and they're motivated to go out and get their friggin' picture taken by Antifa potentially and take the risk to get fired because they're so desperate to talk to a group of brothers and talk about this stuff because they feel like they're losing control of their lives. So men created this thing. So let us create our space. Okay, I'm sorry that you feel excluded, but it's not for you, first of all. Now, we're hoping to have women in our lives, but we don't owe it to you because you feel like entitled to something that you didn't create. Okay, that's number one. Number two, though, is what happens when women enter, and this is a known thing for thousands of years, especially young, attractive women. When young, attractive women enter male spaces, the men lose social cohesion. They start fighting each other over women. There's a very good analogy in nature that I always think of when I'm trying to talk about this subject. I don't remember where I saw this, but I'm pretty sure I read it in an article in like Nature or something, where there was a wall full of male spiders, and they were just kind of just sitting there, just like spiders do. They just kind of hang out, right? And then a scientist found a female spider that looks to humans like they look the same, but the spiders know that that's a female because there's pheromones or something, or they look a little bit different. All they did was they took one female spider on this giant wall full of male spiders, and they put it right in the middle. Guess what happened? All the spiders started killing each other because they wanted to get to the female. That's what happens when you put Laura Southern in I got so angry at Richard Spencer when he invited Tila Tequila, this Asian whore,
I didn't know he did that.
It was so embarrassing.
Oh,
he invited her to MPI, and that's it. Was his conference. And all these men are like climbing over each other to like get a picture with this porn star, and it's like, this is why women are not supposed to be in political organizations.
Okay, but
they destroy men's cohesion.
But
in
here's
order
the thing:
to,
the
that's
left
the reason.
uses women. The left uses women.
Of
to
course
good
they
effect.
do. They're powerful.
So why?
Yeah.
So that's the point, right? Because you're leaving this weapon on the table, and I.
No, but they use it. They use it to destabilize. See,
right,
it's not.
Right.
No. See, women are so important, and when you take them out of the home, you destroy your future. You destroy the generations that are supposed to come. They're not. Look, leftists don't have kids. I mean,
agree.
Come on.
Yeah, I think you're
it's
right.
It's ridiculous.
I'm doing devil's advocate, but I think that's the point.
Sure.
Is that right-wing men don't want to use women as whores, basically.
Yeah.
So that's what it comes down to. Like, yeah, you can get a pretty girl and put her up on the stage, and people will go nuts. But that's not what you want to do to your sister, your mother, your wife, your daughter.
Exactly right. Yeah, and it's, I'm a misogynist because, I want to have women protected. I mean, it's like, oh, I remember getting into like arguments with women in big cities about this topic. It's like, I don't know if you should be walking down the street at that hour. And she's like, whoa, I could do anything I want. I'm like, oh, for God's sakes, I'm trying to help, and I'm not trying to insult you or anything. But they get insulted, and it's. I don't know what to do, Lynn. I mean, this is the media that and the culture that we're brought up in, where women are told that they're supposed to be men, and men are told that they're supposed to be more feminine. I mean, it's an absolutely evil, satanic, communist agenda. And I actually had this as a note because I saw this recently, and I encourage anybody who's never seen it, please watch the video by Yuri Bezmenov. He's a KGB defector to the West. And he gave a talk back in the 80s where he's explaining, like on a blackboard, like in front of all these like concerned citizens. And you can tell it's the 80s when they like cut to the audience because the haircuts and the fashion is like super 80s. Big hair, big shoulder pads. It's really funny. But he's standing up there and he's got his chalk and he's basically explaining how the communist Soviet Union mainly, because he came from there, was subverting the West. And he said the biggest way you defeat an enemy is not by fighting them in a war. I mean, Russia lost the biggest number of people in the Second World War than any other country. Proportionally, Poland got hit harder, but like the Soviet Union is much bigger, so they lost millions of people. So that's not exactly a great victory. The greatest victory you can have is not to fight a war, but is to subvert your enemy. And then he, as a KGB officer, and he explained this is how he was trained, what the KGB does to its enemies. And back in the 80s, the Soviet Union and the United States were definitely enemies. What they tried to do was they tried to agitate the unhappy groups of people in the West. And that's typically people on the left, because the left is usually a coalition of people who are frustrated with the system. Greg Johnson calls them the coalition of the useless. I wouldn't go quite that far, but it's the gays, the blacks, the Hispanics, basically all the groups that are unhappy with the system. So what do you teach them? You teach them, well, the system's out to get you. You need to destroy it. You need to flip it over. So they tell, in the civil rights movement, they tell the blacks this. They tell later on in the 80s the homosexuals this. But in the 70s, they're telling the women this. You need to divorce your husband. He's oppressing you. You need to get out. In the education system. And go watch the video, because he explains it in extreme, like he's in a position to know. Okay, this is something that if you're a historian, you really need to know your sources, right? This guy, he's got a thick Russian accent. He's got these glasses on. He's clearly intelligent. He's explaining with extreme precision how this stuff works, and it all makes sense. So if you don't listen to me, listen to him. But I'm sort of interpreting what he's saying, or trying to communicate it to this audience. And basically he's saying, in the case of women, they were taught that your family is no good. Get out there, be free. women's lib, kid lib, which is something I never heard of, but I guess that was actually a thing. There was a guy on the left. He was a big radical, and I think it was the Students for Democratic Society or one of those groups similar to that back in the 70s. Ginsburg, some Jewish guy. He basically said, you need to go out and kill your parents. And I'm not kidding when I say that. I actually want you to go out and kill your parents because they're the source of all the horrors that the system is teaching you. And the FBI had like a video explaining that this was actually something that the left was not just the left, but the communists were doing. And then this Russian guy is confirming it, that this is what they're doing. This is how you weaken society. In the education system, you get them away from anything of practical value. Doesn't really matter what they end up studying, but as long as you're not studying physics, foreign languages, chemistry, mathematics, put them on sexuality, anything but the practical, you will destroy the future generations. And he says this process takes about 20 years because that is the length of a generation for it to get into effect. So look at where we are now. We've got basically a group of people that were brought up in this stuff that are now getting older, getting into power. The process is working, and the Cold War is over, but those things were put into the media, put into the education by people in the United States who are sympathetic to the Soviet Union, to the communist agenda, and directly by the KGB as well, helped along to subvert the United States. And women's liberation was a big part of that because once you destroy the family, the women then become more interested in society at large. And what is that? That's administered by the government. It's no longer administered by people in the household. And so Yuri Bezmenov explained a lot of this stuff as part of a communist agenda. And that stuff is taking hold today. I mean, so I think you missed some of that, Lynn, because you had to step away, but James, you heard hopefully some of that. And look at where we are. All the groups. I mean, if you were just imagine, forget who you favor, left, right, doesn't matter. Just think like this is like a step away and think of it as a chess game. One side and the other side. And you've got your enemy over there, and you can go and send your forces in to die and to try to kill some of theirs, and hopefully you're clever about it, but you're going to lose some people. Well, forget that. Instead, let's pretend you're black, and then the other side of the chessboard is white. Well, let's get all the white side to start fighting itself. Let's have the family torn up. Let's have them fight. Let's have the homosexuals pitted against the heterosexuals. Let's have the men pitted against the women. Let's have, within that group, let's have all the racists fight each other. That's exactly where we are. Okay? This stuff is evil, and it's used to weaken people. And people need to get out of their rear end and actually take a step back and realize that they're part of a larger game. We're all pawns. But when you're fighting other pawns and you have more in common with the other pawns than the damn guy upstairs, you need to realize that you're being manipulated. So I think that's my message to women who get angry at this stuff. We're not against you. We're just frustrated that you've been pitted against us. And men, have been pitted against women too in some ways as well. And I don't necessarily endorse pickup artistry or MGTOW. But that was a response to feminism. And I don't think there's solutions, by the way, but I think it's sort of a predictable outcome. Have you heard of MGTOW, Lynn? You know what that stands for?
Men going their own way.
Right. Yeah. And I think I fell into that for a while. I went through a bad relationship. I'm not going to get into the details unless you really want me to, but I mean, you've heard it all before. It's just having a very upsetting time with someone where you wanted to, have something good, didn't work out, and you're looking for somebody to blame. And well, gee, there's about 1,000 YouTube channels dedicated to this stuff, and some of them are going to sound good, and so you're going to listen to them. And women listen to this stuff too. And
yeah.
I read books that are written for women and about breaking up with your stupid boyfriend kind of thing, and it's like there's tons of these things out there, and so it appeals to people. But you got to realize that's not the end game. You can't be blaming the other side. You have to work together. It's a yin and a yang.
You also have to realize, as a woman, it's super easy to just be nice to men, and when you do that, they just melt at your feet, basically. Like I'm not public. Nobody knows what I look like. I'm not doing this based on my looks, and I don't have huge influence anyway. But my role, I always think of myself as a sister, and I know I'm probably older than most of the guys out here, but the point is, if this is not the advice you want, I'm sure it's not, but it's like all you have to do is be nice to these guys, and they will love you.
Right. Yeah, Lynn, you and I were talking about this,
Yeah.
and you're totally right. It's a lot of these guys. I know a lot of guys like this person, and I don't speak to women directly like this, but I know guys who speak to women on the internet like this, and I don't think that's maybe the best thing they want to do, but it's out of frustration, and it's basically out of there's a very good video actually on the internet. I hope it's still up, where they were interviewing Kurt Cobain of all people. Okay, Kurt Cobain, who shot himself, but at the time he was not feeling suicide. Yeah, who knows? But he at the time, at least of the interview, he didn't feel suicidal. And he actually explained in a moment of, I think, very good self-awareness and insight, he basically said that a lot of the reason he was depressed for most of his life was he didn't have a mate. And when he met Courtney Love, and they got married and had a kid, he was much happier. So a lot of the frustration that Katie, a lot of these guys are expressing is just because they're lonely. A lot of that's what a lot of the hate is coming from.
True. As you heard from my little girl, it's bedtime around here, so I'm going to have to wrap it up. I'm really glad we could have you join us, Adam.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on, Adam.
Thanks, James. I'm sorry. I hope you got to talk enough, James. I don't know if you did.
I was fine. I really liked what Adam was saying.
Okay.
No sense in me declaring myself a misogynist all over again. I don't see. That's why I get along with women and guys that love women and trust them and put them on a pedestal don't get along with women.
You do love women. What are you talking about? The thing is that you have to understand that women are different. And this is what a lot of guys, young guys who are lonely, don't get. And I've gotten this as a woman who has somewhat masculine interest or intellect or something. I don't think that's true, but I just come off that way sometimes. But anyway, I've gotten this where like people are like, "Oh, you're just like your brother, but except you're a girl." It's like very bad. Don't ever tell me that. It's so you have to understand that women are different from men and accept that and treat them differently. It sounds really basic, but I think a lot of guys are not doing that. And sometimes that's James, what you consider your misogyny is your understanding that men and women are profoundly different, and your acceptance of women as we are.
Well, the misogyny means distrust or dislike. Okay, to me it's distrust. I don't trust women, period, because I know that they're always going to be subject to, influences other than me. I don't trust my mother. Yeah. But it's not because I dislike them. It's just because I know that they're weak and they're highly susceptible to social pressure that I'm not susceptible to. So just like I can't trust most men, I can't trust women.
I was going to say, you don't trust most men either. So
no.
You accept people for who they are.
Yeah, they are who they are. Yeah, so women are very useful. I like them. Okay. I just don't trust them.
Well, I think what you said was very sensible, James, and I definitely share a lot of that. But what I was going to say about you is that, from what I can tell, you're very, you're very generous, and so whatever James may be saying and what it may seem like to some women listeners, perhaps, his actions are always very noble and honorable from what I can tell. He's just trying to basically, I think, protect himself from harm, and he's not trying to hurt anybody. So I think that's just coming from his experience.
Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you.
Meant every word. Yeah.
I had an old Mormon woman a few weeks ago stop me on the road and told me I was a good man, and I said that I argued with her a little bit. I told her, she said, "You're a good Christian man." I said, "I'm not." I said, "I'm a heathen." And she said, "No, you should have been a Mormon." She said, "You're a good man." So, just because I was doing work for people in the neighborhood. Yeah, it's really not hard to impress women.
It's true.
Women appreciate men who work.
Absolutely. Yes, that's true.
Especially for them.
Okay, thank you. That's the Crackpot Podcast with a very illustrious guest, Adam Smith of the Myth of the 20th Century.
Getting late and we've got shit to do in outer space. Mothers can wait. We will take the ones worth saving. Pack your bags, we are vacating now. Forever, forever. There's a cosmic radio in my head, and it's reading news articles, and the correspondent sadly said the universe is flat. He also mentioned that gravity is caused by our cavities and our reflection of time's not a receding hairline, it's all mass produced in the back of our mind. There's some things that we will never know, and I don't ever want to know. And so it goes. Let's